I will say I feel very called out about do not like aggressively wipe your face because sometimes like after a long day you're just like,
Yeah, you're just like, oh. Alrighty, welcome back to the Chemist Confessions podcast. I'm Victoria.
And I'm Gloria.
This is a human conversation on all the skincare science we talk about on the daily. And today we are covering a pretty massive topic. Today we are covering pore care.
Yeah, I think so. The year started out with some, I guess, neater topics, like one specific new technology in skincare,
Yeah.
like PDRN, spicules. And those to us already felt like, oh, we have to talk about sourcing. There are different types, different shapes, and it's a broad topic, and it feels almost like it's one of those things that we hope when we were putting together, it's just difficult to have a neat like this is why you have big pores. Here are the solutions. This is why it targets these biological pathways. As we go on, we're gonna be like, it's kind of a mess.
Yeah, so I think to even just kickstart all that Gloria's sharing is ultimately pores in general are not like collectively looked at in an organized fashion. They're coming from different angles. So there's the biology of skin's pores, right? And what contributes to its shape and size. There's the ingredient like solutions based angle, what topically seems to affect pores. And then there's the skincare product realm, completely different angles, analyzing it completely different ways. So to kind of give you guys some structure to today's episode, in the first section, we're going to look at pore biology and how maybe our genetics and even things like gender and our ethnicity, how these things can factor into how our pores look. In the second section, we'll actually talk about skincare ingredients that have been looked at for pore reduction. And then finally, we'll come at it from a skincare routine angle. So we have a lot to cover today. So let's just jump right in, straight into what are pores. Yeah. Okay. So speaking of that and everything that we're sharing, there's a great review paper, and just right out of the gate, this is their sentiment, which I'm going to read to you verbatim. And they write, skin pores is a lay term that is poorly defined in medical literature and is often categorized in terms of arbitrary circular diameters through instrumentation measurement. That could not be more like
general.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Most general way of describing a pore. And after Gloria and I have read enough papers and through our backgrounds, honestly, creating skincare to tackle some of these skin concerns, I think the general definition of a pore in skincare and pore reduction is generally an enlarged opening of the pilosebaceous follicle. So these follicles, will actually put a sketch diagram by us way back in the day. This is like,
I love this diagram. It's so cute.
Yeah, I think this is like when we first started, when we sketched up. But ultimately, these types of openings typically can include a hair follicle, but it usually has a sebaceous gland that's attached to these openings in the skin, and sometimes can even have sweat glands also as part of this whole structure within skin.
And because the whole pore structure is tied directly associated so closely with sebaceous glands and sebum, it's often thought of as an oily skin concern and tied directly with acne. And oftentimes that's why on the product landscape side, you'll always hear about those things almost in tandem with each other. But for my fellow dry skin people, they'll know that pores can happen to anyone and everyone, and sometimes oily skin solutions for your dry skin pores may not really be the best. And everything that Victoria just covered to show how diverse pores are. But I do just want to jump in from the side that like this is also this whole background about just what pores are and things that's associated with. This is why one of my pet peeves is talking about like skincare that talk about ingredients that cause your pores to not be able to breathe. And it's just one of those like it's wrong in every single sentiment, every angle type of
Yes, yes, and I love how like pores almost have this kind of like mythological creature about the way they're described. Some people consider it's alive, it's a mouth, its skin's like mouths that open and close, like it's just fascinating, like all the things that are tied, like just wild descriptions of how pores function. But ultimately, we should talk about how, in general, pore care is focused around visible pores. We all have pores, okay? Let's be real. But what they're looking at, and this is through a lot of research groups out there, use visual imaging to kind of map out pores and calculate the area. And ultimately, the general sense is visible pores are the ones that tend to be scrutinized and want to be tackled. So, with that, in that understanding, it turns out that there are actually a lot of factors that contribute to unwanted large pores. And what's been kind of fun for me and Gloria is that these factors are actually decently well studied, but you'll see that it's not necessarily all that organized. So I'm going to share with you a little bit of data and a little bit of testing. So one of the first things that was immediately looked at, because Gloria had mentioned that excess sebum usually tends to have a correlation to pores and pore size. And immediately people think that gender will have a factor. And in a sense, that is true because men tend to have more sebum production. So this general sense of having a larger pore size. However, what was fascinating was that one lab had found that there is contradictory data that shows that even in females, sebum output and pore size can increase substantially during the ovulation phase of a female's menstrual cycle. They tie it to secondary increases in progesterone, which affect the sebaceous gland, which I found so fascinating. And it's kind of like, but females are not, it's not just a male issue.
Yeah, and I think this makes perfect sense to me that it's tied to the fluxes of your hormone, and also it is not your brain playing tricks on you that leading up to ovulation, then your period, that you're like, my skin feels horrible. I don't know if I'm moody or it just feels that way, but there's actually some science that ties it together. I also find it really trolly that it's like a weird biological signal that when you got the shine, it's the beacon that I'm fertile.
Ting, and you're like, wow, bro, really?
Sexy.
Yeah. So that was a very interesting find. So another couple of factors that have been looked at is age, of course, anything with skin, age. And the second thing is ethnicity. One of the studies that we want to share today is actually a massive study that was done by L'Oreal. They actually looked at 2,585 women of different countries and continents, specifically Brazil, France, China, India, and Japan. And they wanted to look at specifically pores, size, density, and coverage. And what's really fascinating is that they also wanted to not just look at ethnicity, but the age range from 18 to over 70.
Cradle to grave level of study. That's great.
Yes. Awesome. So we're going to share a couple tables, specifically the density of enlarged pores and the area of enlarged pores. And a couple takeaways here is that of these ethnicities, you can see that Brazilians tend to have a higher density of enlarged pores, and then generally as well as Indians. And then the kind of like middle tier, we would say, is the French and Japanese. And finally, with the lowest amount of density, you're looking at China. Chinese.
I'm actually very surprised at how pronounced the difference is, because usually with a lot really large scale statistic studies like this, sometimes like at the end of it all, you're like, oh, blah 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 is directionally more this than the other group. But if you look at the charts, they're usually super duper close to each other, or they have to manipulate the line chart so that you can actually tell the difference. But without even looking at the graphs, looking at the raw data, you're talking about like a 30% or 40% difference. So it's definitely obviously this doesn't draw conclusions from lifestyle or genetics directly per se, but I'm surprised at how visible this difference is.
Yeah, and I think the other really fascinating thing about this paper is even just the difference between Japanese and Chinese ethnicity. I think sometimes what happens is it just all gets kind of dumped into like Asian skin, you know, but it's so fascinating how just seeing that discrepancy between ethnicities. I'm also going to share a couple other pieces. For some reason, this doesn't include Brazilians, but this still looks at Chinese, Indian, Japanese, and Caucasian. The reason why I want to show these tables is to they actually measure size of pores and density, but then they actually break it up again by age. And I like the linear graph so that you kind of can see by age how things change. And their conclusion is that between age and ethnicity, they find that ethnicity is a much stronger contributing factor to pore size and just pores in general and the aesthetic of pores compared to age. And I did find that to be pretty interesting all around. So definitely take a
And
look at these graphs.
yeah, you can see Chinese all the way at the bottom. According to the study, Chinese people are practically poreless, which is
I
awesome. I don't. I feel
I
like
don't
our
know
Chinese.
if people necessarily, I feel like Chinese people out there probably don't necessarily agree.
Yeah, they're like, I have pores. I have pore problems. What are you talking about? But yeah, I find it to be super interesting, and the general. I find. I also think it's interesting that over time it doesn't seem to change that much. It's almost like visually that default level of
Mhm.
the number and the density, the number of pores and the area, average area that it covers through time as you age seems relatively plateaued, which
Mhm.
I thought one of the theories, there are many theories behind why pores get bigger, and one of the theory is as you age, that loss of collagen and elasticity contributes to that like visible increasing
Mhm.
size. So I thought the main area would see a much more,
Mhm.
I guess, measurable change. But it's kind of interesting how it does go up a little bit, but that slope seems a lot more flatlined than I thought.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's, if you look at the size of pores for the Indian ethnicity, you'll notice that over as the subjects are older, that size of pore tends to increase. And one thing as we were doing our research, I should also note is that researchers actually have seen that those with darker Fitzpatrick skin types actually have a different type of epidermal architecture.
Mm,
And I'm going to read this line verbatim, but basically they write people of color have aberrant epidermal architecture defined as the presence of stalagmite like structures. When I heard stalagmite, I was like the rocks in caves.
like,
Yes, at the dermal epidermal junction, which correlates to enlarged pore size. And so I found this really fascinating because they basically had note that the dermal epidermal junction sits in between your epidermis and dermis. Okay. This junction has been looked at pretty extensively for a lot of aging factors in
anything
skin.
structural goes there.
Yes, and they've actually noticed that in darker skin types that this junction's architecture looks quite different. And I found that so fascinating. And it has been noted that in darker skin types, they do tend to have an enlarged pore size. Okay, so that's age, that's ethnicity. Let's also talk about skin conditions. Gloria kind of teased it, but yes, they have looked at skin elasticity in terms of aging skin, structural changes. They have found that elasticity does contribute to more pronounced visible pores. And then the other thing we also have to touch on is excess sebum production. That usually gets tied hand in hand with pore care. And
Hmm.
Gloria has also teased that whenever people think of pore care, their night must reduce sebum. It's like doesn't consider dry skin types, and they just kind of all lump it all together and just expect
Hmm.
that these things should all work this should all tackle all the same things essentially. While in some ways it is true, excess sebum is tied to enlarged pores, and this is also does correlate to those who have acne breakouts. We should also mention there's an interesting note that the severity of acne does not actually correlate to increased pore size. So for acne prone people like myself, if you're like freaking out that you're like, my acne breakouts, my cystic acne is just going to make my pores worse, that's something not necessarily have to worry about. We would just focus on your acne care. Yeah.
That is a sort of belief. I think in high school that was a prevailing belief. It's like as your breakout progress through the years, and you're just you're dealing with acne for decades. It just makes your pores worse. But it's good to know that it doesn't. It's not directly related to each other.
Yeah. So we would say this feels a little haphazard, but this is a general understanding of factors that are not necessarily within your control that contribute to pore and large pores. And I think where Gloria and I probably had some challenges is that while it's very clear that ethnicity is an important factor in looking at pore care treatments, a lot
Hmm.
of the studies, their subject groups are actually really uniform. Like, for example, there's actually a few of the studies we'll talk on. They come from Korea or
Hmm.
Japan, but they're testing a very a single ethnicity group. And I think that sometimes for Gloria and I, it's kind of like, oh, that's, you're capturing a very like limited scope in this broad space, and kind of one of the conundrums we have when we like draw conclusions.
I think that's such an important aspect of talking about skincare studies in general.
Yeah.
I mean, we've lamented on multiple subjects and episodes about the general lack of data across skincare, and that just creates an additional layer of complexity that for
Mm,
most ingredients and technologies that we speak of, we don't even have the bandwidth to cover this because the data doesn't even quite exist. Sometimes it's tough to talk about these statistical data across ethnicities, age range, gender, because a lot of times there isn't a actionable takeaway. It's really fascinating insights, but like Victoria mentioned, it's kind of almost like the beginning of understanding these different
yeah.
quirks. Products that work for one group might not work for the other. So, for example, if we know that based on the study, the Brazilian population tend to have bigger pores and on average bigger pore sizes. What's the underlying cause? And usually that's only a couple of hypotheses, and the story is not complete essentially. So it's
Yeah.
hard for us to look at this and go, okay, great, we have this general takeaway, but what is the solution? So that's just a
Yeah.
little rant to say we feel you guys, but we're gonna take a quick break now, and in the next section, we're gonna dive into the few ingredients that actually have data on reducing pore size. Woo.
Speaking of skincare products for those with excess sebum, Aquafix Hydrating Water Serum is 100% oil free. We emphasize oil free because a lot of oil free claims aren't actually oil free. What that means is stress free hydration for oily skin types that need a boost without that added weight or shine.
So if you've been needing an extra boost of glycerin, NNFs, and other humectants, plus soothing madecassoside, try out our Aquafix Hydrating Serum and use the code CCPodcast 2025 for 15% off your order.
Yay!
All right. Okay, we're back. We talked about the complex world of pore biology and why it's so complex to come up with a neat, say, biological pathway to target to reduce the appearance of visible pores. So let's talk about ingredients that actually have data around pore reduction. And the
Mm.
first category is of zero surprise to anyone. It is retinoids. And across the retinoid umbrella, multiple retinoids have all been looked at for pore reduction. And we should mention that a lot of these are more the pore count is more ancillary to whatever else they're studying with these retinoids. That's just something to mention because I
Yes.
think it's it's almost like an addendum to the retinoid study. So some of these are we do have a selection bias to a certain degree to keep in mind here because these people that are selected for retinoid studies, if it's for acne, these people already are at a certain default oiliness or acne prone tendency. So that degree of improvement you see might be skewed a little bit, but that's just something to keep in mind. First off is one that we don't talk about a lot. Tazorac is one of the retinoids that is prescription only in the States. And this study looked at it for 24 weeks at the 0.1% level. In the study, general skin conditions across the board was evaluated by expert graders. And at the end of 24 weeks, so a pretty long study, 42% of the patients show at least a 1 point improvement. I will say the numbers don't sound that scintillating. Like 42% show improvement is that blah. 1 point improvement is pretty decent. Because usually expert graders are on a scale of like 0 to 5,
Mhm.
and so 1 point is a pretty should be a visible difference.
We should also mention that tretinoin has briefly, like minimally, also been looked at for pores. There is a study that also looked at 0.025%, so lower dose tretinoin, that was used once daily for 90 days. And they did also see significant reduction in pore size as well. And finally, retinol. Can't forget retinol. But a Korean group looked at low doses of retinol in two specific groups. So they had a group of 36 women that applied 0.045% retinol versus 0.075% retinol. And then they had a second group either apply 0.1% retinol or 0.2% retinol on half face.
I was just gonna jump in and say that as a quick reminder, retinol percentages we've talked about in the past typically range between 0.3 to 1%. So this is a pretty low dose study.
Yeah.
So really interesting all around.
Yeah, and if you're wondering why the percentages are the way they are, you can see, we'll go ahead and show the results and put them on the screen because there's a lot to look at. But you can see this is kind of that classic Korean concentration use where they actually use the IU value versus actual weight concentration. So they actually measured a few skin concerns across weeks 2, 4, 8, 12, and 24 weeks. They looked at things like crow's feet, wrinkles, even the nasolabial fold, but then they
Mhm.
also had looked at pore area. And with that, what's really neat about this study is that you can see kind of a pretty nice decrease across
Mhm.
all concentrations and generally pretty uniform, which I was like, oh, these are very pretty graphs. So all of that to say that even a low dose retinol could also be helpful in general pore care.
Yeah. So this is definitely very interesting and something that we did mention last year around this time when we were doing our retinol series that
Yeah.
we live in a culture and environment where people always feel pressure or the need to punch for that
Yes.
higher dose.
Yeah.
And this is just another study to kind of reinforce that there's no need. Just stick to what works for you, your skin, your routine. We should zoom in a little since this is episode on pores. We should zoom in a little closer on the pore chart, and they only took one measurement around pores, which is just total pore area, which is the most important one that kind of gives you a idea of just how visible your pores are. And for the higher doses, at the very end of it, you see more of a decrease
Mm,
and more of a drop off. But again, this
mm,
is a relatively long study of 12 to 24 weeks, if that
yeah.
gives you an idea of how long it takes. For the low doses, there's a very steady decline. And we should mention that something else I personally really like about how they presented this data is sometimes we'll come across data that's presented as percent improvement from baseline, and they will
Mm.
blow up the y-axis. So even if it's a 3% improvement, it will look like a huge bar. But if you look at
Yeah.
it, it's kind of basically the raw measurement. It's just given us
Yeah.
the total pore area in millimeters square.
Yeah.
So at the end of it, just to give you guys an idea, the total pore area has decreased by almost half. So this is pretty exciting to look at.
Okay, with that, we talked about retinoids. Let's actually talk about chemical exfoliants because there's a little bit there.
Yes, so this is actually probably one of the other top recommendations if you're
Yeah.
talking about pore minimizing. I would say even higher up than retinoids because I think retinoids is still tied so strongly with either anti-aging or acne that pore feels secondary or it's not talked about in that sense as
Yeah.
much.
Yeah.
But if people go on forums or Google like how do I take care of pores,
Hmm.
you will get turned to something like a salicylic acid. But today, the study that Victoria found actually looked at glycolic acid in the context of using it as a peel. This study was done in Japan. So the study we just shared was a Korean study, and this is a Japanese study. So
Mm-hmm.
again, going all the way back to biology, this is all interesting data, but it's looking at population in a much more controlled fashion, which you have to extrapolate a little bit. In the study, they use a 30% glycolic acid peel every 2 weeks for a total of 5 treatments, so 10-week treatment series. And at the very end of it, it showed a reduction of open dark pores by about 30%, with over 70% of subjects showing improvement, which I will say the 70% subject show improvement is an important metric.
Hmm.
Um,
Yeah.
and just note that 30% reduction at least is a little bit less than the reduction level of the previous Korean study, but that did look at retinol use for a much longer time period. Just a couple
Yeah.
things to keep in mind.
Yeah.
But I do love that this paper showcases example pictures of what pore imaging technique typically looks like. Based on this picture, I do want to say that this kind of goes hand in hand with my constant struggles with instrumental data is
Yeah.
across different metrics. Instrumental measurement is super important, but I have a hard time gauging for basically percent improvement based on instrument measurement. And what percent is that a more visible or market
Yes.
improvement?
Yes.
That number must be different for all metrics because you look
Yes.
at the first image is a straight image, then you have a black and white version of it, and then
Hmm.
lastly you have a computer mapped out
Hmm.
mapping of the pores. That's how they got the percent reduction in pores. But if
Hmm.
you look at the straight image of just the face without filters, without analysis and anything else, I don't know, man. Like that, it, maybe you can tell me that the pores are
Yes.
looking better, and I will probably agree with you. But it's not. If you don't tell me this is a pore study, and you're like, "What's better about skin picture number two?" I'll be like, smoothness. It's not as shockingly visual as 30% sounds.
Basically, I totally agree. And when I looked at these photos, I feel like I'm really just trusting in the instrumental analysis
Yeah,
because
skincare is a belief.
yeah, because between A and B, also the lighting is like slightly different, which really bugs me because I think it really contributes to how you're portraying pores in this picture. I think it's tough, and it also depicts kind of the challenges of pore analysis, and also why I always feel like pore reduction is a secondary skin concern that's looked at in general skincare clinicals. I just, if you look at wrinkles and hyperpigmentation and whatnot, and the sheer data around that compared to pores, this is a much smaller subset of studies we can look at.
Yep, so that's retinoids and chemical peels. This is one of those categories where we're basically rehashing our top actives in general. Because lastly, we're going to talk about niacinamide.
Yeah, so we had a Korean lab, we had a Japanese lab, and this time we are looking at a lab in Taiwan because that's looking at Taiwanese subjects.
I just want to say that clearly East Asians care a ton about pores.
A lot.
So the Korea egg skin look that people are striving for, it is a cultural phenomenon. They really mean they want to be poreless.
Yeah, so we've already spent a lot of time dabbling in the study, so this is going to be a pretty quick run through. But ultimately, the study was looked at 52 subjects, and they actually wanted to look at the combination of 0.03% kinetin combined with 4% niacinamide. And they had the basically comparison group, which is just 4% niacinamide. We should mention that this study actually looks at more than just pores, but they actually look at wrinkle and general skin tone evenness. But I did want to share the results because what they did find was that after 8 weeks of using their niacinamide, I guess both niacinamide topicals twice a day, they found that the number of pores had decreased significantly by roughly 21% in the group that used the combined kinetin and niacinamide versus a 14.7% reduction in the group that used niacinamide alone. But they found that there was no statistical difference between the two groups. So what I like about this is that even the essentially controlled just 4% niacinamide did see a decrease, even though that decrease is not as big compared to retinol.
In the first segment, Victoria said that the biology feels a little haphazard. This is the whole field, and this is why the meat part also feels a little bit over the place. To sum up, your trusty actives, the ones that we talk about a lot, that have a lot of data, are the ones that have been looked at for pore care. So that is your retinoids, your AHAs, and also niacinamide. And I think part of the difficulty with all of that is you'll know that on the product side, all these ingredients are put into very different types of products. And that's why in the last, we're going to take a really quick break, but when we come back, we're going to put it all together in terms of how to tackle pore care from a whole routine perspective. So that is the meat. So it is time to. I'm so excited for this.
She's been waiting for this moment this whole day.
What does that say that I'm lighting up for the non-skincare portion of this?
Again, this is our selfish moment.
So it's time to
break it up, break it up, break. All right.
So this week's animal fact I was in charge of. Victoria talked about what's the dancing spider. Yeah, the dancing peacock spider last week. Yeah, so I decided to continue the trend of interesting mating habits from the insect world.
Oh dear.
So the animal of the week is the hanging fly. So they look like a crossbreed between a dragonfly and a giant mosquito. So yes, attractive. We are on a roll with the cute and fuzzy animals. But their mating habit make me excited. It's bubbling out. So funny. So the thing is, to mate, the male has to give the female a gift in the form of a meal. So basically, it has to offer. They eat other smaller insects. So I kid you not, there's a few scientific studies about it. They call it a nuptial gift. And the funny thing is that, so obviously, if the female doesn't like your food, you're not getting lucky that day.
Okay.
So
she doesn't kill them.
She doesn't kill them. She's just
Okay.
like, no, thank you.
So it's not in and out for me.
Yeah, exactly.
not
It's
gonna
like,
work out.
I said no Taco Bell. So, and the funny thing is the research around this, they actually they gave the male different insects they offer the females.
Okay.
So they don't like ladybugs. Ladybugs don't taste good to them. But anyway, the funniest thing to me is it has to be the right size of insect. Because you give it to a female, she'll start eating, and the male's like, well, I mean, she's occupied. So he'll start doing his thing. But if the female...
Wait, so we just like
now we're copulating.
Okay.
And then if the female finish eating it too fast, she'll be like, no, she will kick the bug off and fly off. So the fruit flies, no bueno, because she'll finish eating way too fast. And then they actually study the time. So on average, a male will finish his business in 20 minutes. So basically,
20 minutes?
be ashamed, some of Yes.
Sorry.
Hanging fly lasts 20
I
minutes.
feel like there's a lot of things we can extrapolate. From
Yes,
this.
that's why it's so funny. There's so many inappropriate
20
jokes.
minutes.
20 minutes of insect
That's
sex.
incredible.
Yeah, so the funny thing is like, so I guess this tests the male's hunting ability.
Okay.
If you give the female a little bitch insect and she finished eating in 30 seconds, she's gonna kick you off and then fly away.
Okay.
So, and the funniest thing is, if the male end up giving the female an insect that's too big, and he finishes thing and she still eating, he will take the rest away and try to offer it to another female. So
Some entrepreneurship.
I know, and no food waste. So yes, that is the hang fly mating ritual. I just feel like there's so many human lessons baked in there.
So if you distract the female,
Yes, exactly.
you can get your chance.
Yes.
Also,
Have a burger. Please enjoy your burger. Nothing to see here.
and make sure it's a big enough burger,
Yes.
not like a kid's meal cheeseburger.
No. Double decker. Something that takes her 20 minutes to eat.
And so if she doesn't like it, she kicks him off.
Yeah. Literally just like...
Oh, pretty good.
And then he has to go hunt again to bring them another offering.
It doesn't seem like the female is very interested in the idea of procreating.
No, she just
wants a
food.
meal.
I just want a burger.
Is this sugar daddy behavior? Like, could you
guess so.
characterize this as sugar daddy behavior?
I guess so, or I guess she's very practical.
Yeah, survival.
Yeah. I was like, damn. Where's my burger?
You're right.
Yeah.
In this section, we're actually going to talk about skincare and your general skincare routine and how I guess generally what tips can help with pore care. So the first step in the skincare routine that seems to be helpful is cleansing.
Yes.
There's actually a study that was done in Korea, and this whole study is in Korean. So understand that this is with the help of Google Translate, and it's a very small study. It's 15 subjects. But what I found really fascinating is they actually wanted to look at different soaps that included herbs, 3 specific herbs. Okay. So they had 3 different soaps. Okay.
Mhm.
And they wanted to see how that compared to regular soap or just generally washing a face with water. And this protocol, I would say, is wasn't completely clear to me, but it seems like what they did is every week they had these subjects come in and they were going to wash their face 3 separate times. Okay. And in their protocol,
That's
they
a
were-
lot of washing.
That's a lot of washing.
My face feels dry just reading that.
well, I was thinking, I was like, it's got to be 3 different times a week. There's no way it's one after another. So this is me assuming. Okay. But anyway, so the protocol is that they wash with either water or regular soap with no herb or the herb-based soap. And they would create a lather and they actually write massage the skin for 10 to 20 times, wash their face. And then what's really kind of fun is that they tell them to wipe off the moisture with a towel, but do not rub, must be lightly pressed. Okay, so we'll show the results here, and you're actually looking at 3 different charts. And the reason why it's 3 different charts is because they're testing 3 different herb soaps, okay? But what's kind of cool about this is that it's in comparison of these 3 times. Each of these 3 times is compared to cleansing with regular soap, and water.
Mm.
And what you'll see is that there is actually, especially in the just regular soap group, a reduction of pore size across all 3 times that they ran these studies. And so I thought that was really fascinating in the sense of how cleansing could be a helpful step in general pore care and
I
pore
think
size.
when we do cleansing time and time again, it's just one of those things that it doesn't have a ton of really hard science
Hmm.
attached to it, but it will just keep coming up in these little studies where it's like, be mindful and do it and be thorough and don't be
Yeah.
aggressive. I will say I feel very called out about do not like aggressively wipe your face because sometimes like after a long day you're just like,
Yeah, you're just like, oh.
yeah. I'm very guilty of that, but I will
Yeah.
remember to pat pat pat.
Yeah, and I think the other thing that's kind of interesting is that even water did find a decrease as well, especially in the 2 other groups. So I thought that was just worthy of noting. So, but lo and behold, just even general soap had a significant decrease. So that's the general takeaway there, even though a small study.
Step 1, wash your face.
Step 1, wash your face. Very good. All right. Next thing. We talk about chemical exfoliants in the last group. So this would be a reminder that if you don't have an exfoliant in your life, it's a good time if you're especially with pore care to consider adding a chemical exfoliant. It does not have to be salicylic acid. I'd like to remind you that delic acid has also been looked at in terms of acne, especially for oily skin types. But glycolic, as we had given a shout out to before in the second section, even lactic, just having one can be helpful in this arena.
I think this is the category that when you're looking at pore care, a
Mm.
lot of research will probably prod you to toners and
Mhm.
glycolic or salicylic acid toners being some of the more popular products. I
Yeah.
think they're good for daily maintenance for something that's not a level that's not super offensive for most skin types. But at
Yeah.
the same time, a lot of studies, especially with glycolic acid, when you're talking about pore improvement or even hyperpigmentations and wrinkles, those are all at a higher, punchier level. So I do
Mm.
recommend if you're curious, try a home peel and try to use it in more semi-regular succession to maybe see a more visible result. Again, the toner level is more for daily maintenance, and I
No.
wouldn't expect a lot of visible improvement there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. Yeah, definitely something to keep in mind. And I think there's one ingredient that I feel like really deserves a shout out because of a study I found, and that is SK2's Patera.
It's about this all the time, so here you go, surprise,
Yeah,
Patera time.
yeah, and I gotta say, Gloria, this study was a lot of fun. Basically, P&G, they ran a clinical where they had 2 groups. One group was about 47 subjects, and the other
Mhm.
group was 57 subjects. This was all done in Japan, and this is done with their trademark Patera.
I feel like the theme of this episode is Asians hate pores. All Asians don't want any pores.
Yes, and I think that's the theme here. And I'm going to show a couple additional images just so that you can see how unique this study is to me. So what they did was they had subjects, all of these subjects basically take images of their face, okay, the morning that they woke up right before cleansing, after their morning cleanse, and then after their evening cleanse. Okay. And they
Mm,
used a device that would basically take these like strategically captured image sides of their face. And then I also wanted to share how they adapted these photos into like actual measurements. You can see that they kind of highlight, they zoom in on their pores, they kind of map out the areas, and that's how they make their calculations. And what's really fascinating about this study is that these time points. And the
mhm.
reason why I say this is because when they looked at these groups, they actually saw a significant change in pore area morning after they woke up, morning after face wash, and generally evening after face wash is about the same. But I just found that time point to be so interesting that when you wake up, your pore area can look quite different than after you wash your face. So that was something to keep in mind that I
Wait,
guess.
you wake up better or worse?
So you wake up worse and then you cleanse your face and they saw a significant reduction in pore area.
You know, I'm someone, especially with someone with dry skin. I'm a big believer, and well, not believer. That's not that serious, but I usually don't wash my face in the morning very seriously. It's
Mhm.
usually a splash of water to cleanse. But that is interesting. I will take that under advisement.
I think what's why I found this to be so fascinating is because this is a daily fluctuation that happens. This is the aggregate of that.
Mhm.
And the reason why I want to show this is because if you look at, I'm going to show another chart where they actually map out the oscillation of morning after wake up compared to morning after the face wash treatment and then to evening. You can see there's like an actual oscillation of pore area. And I found that to be
Mhm.
so fascinating. I should also mention the other unique part about this study is it's an 8-week study, right? The
Mhm.
first 4 weeks is using a regular treatment, or sorry, is using a regular routine with cleansing. And then after the 4 to 8 week mark is when they actually start using the Patera treatment. And then you
Mhm.
can see an additional decline of pore area
That
once
is
they
very
introduce
cool.
Patera. Yeah. So I thought it was super creative. Also makes me rethink my pores in the morning. And I think the other thing that's I wanted to mention about this study is that for me, I felt like this is probably why people can almost get a little superstitious about pores because, when you hear things like your pores can open and close, which it can't, okay? But you have to remember that these sebaceous pores, they're structures that have a lot going on. And so
Mhm.
there's a lot that's happening with the general sebum excretion that can change the structure and contribute to the structure daily. And also for me, I also realized it's like, I'm not gonna look too hard in the mirror in the morning, I think, until after I wash my
Well,
face.
I was going to mention that pores is one of those things where the optical aspect of it is
Yes.
super important. If you think about it,
Yeah.
the way it's structured, how
Yeah.
shiny your face is, the amount of
Yeah.
sebum, the way light flux bounces off your face, depending on how clean your face is, how
Yeah.
oily it is, can all affect how a pore looks. It might
Yeah.
not be a biologically enlarged or
Yes.
decreased per se, but that is a big factor. And I I used to move around. I guess I move a lot, and sometimes when I move into a new place, and that bathroom lighting is the most unfriendly interrogation
Yes.
level lighting. You're right.
Interrogation.
I don't look at myself in the mirror that hard in the mornings.
Yeah, so I found this study to be so clever. What a creative way of first looking at, general pore changes daily, but then also, how Patera can help in that sense. And I should mention this study also looks at redness, but I only focused on the pore area data here. But yeah, I just overall thought what a creative and well done study here. So
Yeah,
yeah, so that's Patera.
yeah. So the thing here is a lot of product you'll see that's positioned for pores or that could be helpful for pores can come in that like liquidy toner essence type format.
Mm.
And so I wanted to highlight and address the big dog in the room, which is anything witch hazel liquidy stuff. And it's
Ah.
such a cult product, and there is such
Yeah.
a prevailing belief that if you have oily skin, that is
Hmm.
your cure all. That is your astringent buddy for everything. And it's linked to pores anecdotally. So I want to mention that I want to bring this up because we've been asked about this on and off, but witch hazel is one of those really weird ones for us. It has such a long history of use that is not that it doesn't match the amount of data it actually has.
Yes. Yes.
And I'm not going to go into in detail, but I did find a study on witch hazel. And this was published in November 2024. So this is a very recent study.
Recent.
It was done in a Chinese lab, which again, the famous East Asians hate pores. And, um, but this is an in vitro data. They're still looking at
Mm.
anti-inflammatory pathways and potential antioxidant capabilities, all in an in vitro setting. And at the very end of it, they looked at some ex vivo, which are live skin cutouts, to kind of see how that all these things may or may not protect the skin from outside aggressors. Which again, its antioxidant capabilities isn't exactly always advertised. Anti-inflammation is brought up here and there for acne care, but that is about the level of studies and the newness in terms of data around this. What feels like your mother's skincare level of ingredients. So just want to highlight that. This is why we don't talk about it or recommend it as much as maybe some other people would.
We should talk about sebaceous filaments. This was a really popular question when we were polling everyone about pore care is generally how do I take care of sebaceous filaments? So one thing that's really important to know is one, sebaceous filaments are actually really natural and common for skin. Generally what it is just general excess sebum that's like coating the inner, opening. And that's what's contributing to the general sebaceous filament structure. This is normal. All of us will have it. Those that are more pronounced, yes, it can form a plug. But I think where there's a lot of confusion is that it can often get lumped into blackheads, which we want to remind you is blackheads is actually considered a type of acne lesion. Blackheads they can grow in size while sebaceous filaments cannot. Sebaceous filaments also stay, this is very unappetizing, but stay one color, whereas blackheads do not. So I just want to give you guys that, just share some of those differences and just know that generally it looks like this is only just being looked into, but we feel that with some of the tips that we just talked about, this should also help the sebaceous filament scenario. So with that, we should summarize everything that we've covered in a general, what feels like random fashion. And we should talk about what you should be doing for pore care. So first things first, don't forget the ingredient grades. Okay, so everything that we cover, which is, home peel levels of your favorite chemical exfoliant, niacinamide, which you probably already have, and your retinoids at the fine-tuned, dialed-in level. We would say those are the 3 areas that you can already go ahead and try to capitalize on in your routine. The second thing is don't forget the humble but very mighty act of cleansing. And I think for me, after, dabbling in the research, is there's definitely a camp of people that feel like they want to cleanse as little as possible because they want to do their best for their skin barrier. But I would also like to kind of give a different perspective on if you haven't tried, consider cleansing in the morning on top of your cleanse at night.
Last but not least, if you're considering dedicated ingredients or dedicated products for pore care, Pitera sounds like one of those things that we will want to dump on because it's proprietary and it's incredibly expensive. But there is interesting study in the pore realm that's studied in a way that we haven't seen from other ingredients or other categories. So if you can follow it, that's something. If you want to try it, just know that there is this data available on it. But also, we should remind everyone that sometimes just take one half a step away from that mirror. I think nowadays everything is HD and super, super zoomed in, but really pores are natural. It's totally normal to have pores. And if you're doing everything you can to take care of your skin, honestly, I do think the East Asian chase for completely poreless skin is a little manic.
And probably it's a bit unreasonable, right? It's like, I think it's to an unhealthy degree in that sense where they just want to see completely, glass, plastic sheen with just completely smooth structure.
Like your skin really don't gotta be a literal hard-boiled egg. Like some pores is totally fine. So
of the skin concerns out there, just seeing how all the factors contribute, how waking up in the morning can contribute. Pores are not necessarily a stagnant concern like hyperpigmentation or wrinkles, right? I think that's the thing that really stuck out to me as we did this deep dive is that there's a lot of things that could affect it, and daily changes actually have been shown to happen. So because of that, that's kind of just to kind of remind everyone, as Gloria said, is that try not to obsess, know that there are truly good skin days and good and bad skin days. And just know that, the being consistent with your routine, cleansing and your general actives and your moisturizer, those are all things that are just ultimately maintaining and improving your general pore care. So with that, I think we can end this episode.
Yep, so that's it for all the science and recommendations around general pore care. As a preview to next week, our companion episode to pore care. We were talking about it because pore care ranges across such a wide range of skincare products. But the thing that comes up time and time again, and the product landscape that always touts pore perfecting, pore care type of lingo, is our toners. And last year, we already did an episode on all sorts of toner. And this year, the hot new kid on the block is toner pads. So we tested them all. We tested a gazillion toner pads. So next week, we'll take a closer look at all their ingredients, what we think about them, our favorites, our least favorites. And so stay tuned. And that's it. In the meantime, if you have any suggestions on what we should cover, leave a comment down below or write to us at info@chemistconfessions.com. Find us on social where we poll you guys about episode ideas and much more. So we'll see you guys next week. Bye.
Bye, guys.